the representation of the People Amendment Bill 2014, Professor M.B. Rajeev Gowda to move a motion for consideration of the representation of the People Amendment Bill 2014.
Thank you, Deputy Chairman, sir. Sir, I am an idealist. I am in this house because I was born in a family of freedom fighters. My late uncle, Sri M.V. Krishnappa, was a hero of the Quit India movement. My late father, M.V. Venkatappa, was jailed at the age of 15 in the Mysore Chalo Satyagraha. And I grew up listening to their stories of sacrifice, of taking on the establishment. They were just two soldiers in a larger movement, many of whom did not see the light of independence. And this democracy that we have built today, this audacious experiment that India embarked upon, is a result of those sacrifices of freedom fighters across the length and breadth of the country. And those freedom fighters were idealists too. And one of their idealistic goals, sir, was that democracy and participation in electoral representation should be available to every single citizen of this country.
कृपया शांति रखें. कृपया शांति रखें, please. हाँ, बोले.
With that idealistic aim in mind, they had come up with limits to how much could be spent on an election. That limit, the very purpose behind that limit was that every common person, every single citizen of India should be able to contest an election and contest successfully. So that was then. A lot has changed since then. And I'm also a realist. And that is why I want to bring the attention of the House to this clause in the Representation of the People's Act, which focuses on limits to election expenditure. So, our learned law minister is also here. He also is an idealist. He took part in the Jayaprakash Narayan movement and was jailed in the 1970s. And then he had the good fortune to continue to be elected, like me, to the Rajya Sabha, and therefore not to actually confront the realities of electoral politics. I'm coming there, sir. I'm coming there. This time, and congratulations to you, the law minister has had a chance to actually enter the electoral fray, and I'm sure that idealism has been tempered with the realities of what India's electoral processes actually entail. And what they entail is an enormous amount of expenditure, enormous amount of engagement with various kinds of vested interests. This was diagnosed in 1985 by the late Sri Rajeev Gandhi in his centenary address to the Congress party. He basically vehemently argued that we must break the nexus between political parties and vested interests. But if you look at the headlines of the last few days, even from my own state of Karnataka, what do you see? What you see is a very unholy nexus of money and muscle and stick and carrot and use and misuse of institutions. God knows what all is going on and what we have done to that electoral democracy that so many people sacrifice to build. So, how do we fix this? The very first step is to recognize where the problem lies. And I argue that the problem lies in idealistic laws which have had counterproductive effects. If you want an analogy, sir, I would give you the one about prohibition. Across the world, even in India, in some states, we still have prohibition. The law minister represents one such state right now, and the prime minister is from another. But prohibition everywhere has had the impact of having a black backlash. Essentially, you find that underground activities multiply, mafias develop, bootleggers thrive, criminal activity flourishes. Why? Because an idealistic law is turning out to be counterproductive in actual reality. So, I place before this august House my argument that the electoral spending limits that we have put in an idealistic manner are similar in the sense that they have counterproductive impacts on our larger democracy. What are these counterproductive impacts and how do they work? So, think about what happens. To conduct an election, to be a politician, you need to have resources. To stay alive, you can't live on love and fresh air. Just to be a player, to have political actors competing in this system, they need resources. Political parties need resources to sustain, to thrive, to compete, to fight elections. And that is the kind of huge amount of money that we've never been able to come face to face with or recognize that this polity will be clean if we find ways to raise funds for politicians, political parties, for elections to be conducted in a clean and transparent manner. So, look at what happens in the context of electoral spending limits, sir. Electoral spending limits have been increased over time. During the UPA years, it was raised to 70 lakhs per large Lok Sabha constituency. But I submit that across the country, there are numerous constituencies where that spending limit is absolutely violated. In fact, what tends to happen is that expenditure is driven underground. When expenditure is driven underground, who are the players who can actually benefit from this kind of a context? Those with black money, those with the networks to go out there and spend that black money in a manner that can influence voters. So therefore, this has set in motion a vicious cycle across the length and breadth of the country. Today, and I have been, I've heard of stories, let me be more diplomatic, I've heard of stories where the only criterion, the first criterion that is taken up whether somebody can fight an election, somebody should be a candidate or not, is how deep their pockets are, how fat their wallet is, what kind of, the bigger the rogue, the likelier the chance of getting a ticket. In many circumstances, this is what happens. And that is not the polity, that is not the democracy that our founders wanted to create. So it's up to us, starting today, to set in motion the changes that will overturn this terrible equilibrium that we have found ourselves in, and we can do it if we put our minds to it. So therefore, sir, what do I suggest? The general response would normally be, let us have practical, more realistic electoral spending limits, because nobody wants to give up this notion that there should be a limit. And if you listen to civil society arguments, etc., there's a constant demand to tighten the limits on electoral expenditure by candidates. There is another big loophole. There is no limit on what a political party can spend. So perhaps there may be a rationale for trying to do something to curb how much a political party could spend. But the same counter-argument that I'm making in this context, that nothing is ever followed, it is only followed in its breach. And there are two other aspects of this that you must pay attention to, sir. One is what former Prime Minister Vajpayee said. He said every politician, member of parliament, begins his career with a lie because of the false election accounts that they submit. Why do you want to have a law which forces every MP to file a false statement? Is this the kind of behavior that we want to inculcate in this country? That is one, sir. And the late Gopinath Munde once said, and there is a TV recording of this where he said it openly. He said his first election campaign, he spent 8,000 rupees that was given or 9,000 rupees that came from his political party. And he said openly, he said in the last election, this is the election prior to the one that he last fought and before he passed away, and he said he ended up spending 8 crores, and he said, even if the election commission is here to listen to me, I don't care, that is the truth, he said. So that is just an example of the actual reality. People are spending so much, and we're not recognizing that. What happens when you, so if you have any kind of limit, my point is that it will be violated. Why don't you let spending come out openly? Let people see who is spending how much, what campaign is more momentous and more glorious than the other. When I was a much younger man, elections were festivals of democracy. Today, except for the big rallies, the most normal expenditure is not even visible because people are spending that money trying to put it in the hands of voters. And that is the worst corruption that you can see in this country, where voters are being bribed for their votes. So open it up. Let sunlight be the best disinfectant, because there is another counter to this. And that counter is the fact that even if some person spends 10 times more than you, all that you need to spend to be competitive is a certain threshold. 70 lakhs to reach 21 lakh voters is very, very little. You cannot send You're also the Minister for Posts and Telecommunications. In the postcard, you cannot send a postcard to each voter and meet that election spending limit. So get rid of this limit and let sunlight be the best disinfectant. And then I would not stop there. I would go much further, sir. I would actually want to show you a few numbers which tell you how sad this situation in our democracy has become. The first number is 60,000 crores. Recently, there is an organization called the Center for Media Studies, and they have issued a report based on what? On their own methodology, that 60,000 crores was spent by all political parties during the last parliament election. That is their report, and I'm quoting. Now, out of which 45% was allegedly spent by the ruling party. Anyway, this is a huge number. If you put all the MP-led funds and MLA-led funds across the country together, you will not reach this kind of number. Where was that raised? How is it spent? What is the outcome? Who owes what to whom? And what kind of corruption does this engender? Does it trigger? Because people have to make back that money. People have to reward those who contributed to them. That is the question that we need to answer because of all this. If you cannot spend more than 70 lakhs, someone who wants to contest an election and spend a threshold that is competitive cannot legally raise more than 70 lakhs either, because if they do and spend that, you will disqualify them for having violated that expenditure. So honesty is not rewarded in the current system. So therefore, if you get rid of the limit, let each person raise how much ever he or she can do. And that is one of the key arguments that I want to point out. You're not even allowing legitimate fundraising because there's a cap that comes in the way, and you cripple clean politicians. You reward the tainted, you victimize the sainted. So going further, look at another number, sir. This is the one, it is 3,456 crores. This is the amount of cash, gold, and drugs seized during the 2019 election. Now, do you think this represents the sum total of cash, drugs, and gold distributed during the election? This represents the tip of the iceberg, a small fraction of how much was actually involved in this larger process. And therefore, there is a problem, and that problem stems from not making things transparent. And the third number that I want to give you, sir, is 5,851 crores. This is the amount of electoral bonds that were raised, 99% of, or 95% of which went to the ruling party, and mostly in the form of large purchases. And so there you have opacity, you have lack of transparency, you have no idea who contributed to whom and to whom, but for what reason and what are they getting back in return. So this is not the way to go about cleaning our polity or assuring the ideals of our founding fathers. And when this all happens, you're left with the fourth number, 233. 233 MPs in the 17th Lok Sabha face criminal charges. That is nearly half of all MPs. And 29% of them face serious criminal charges, including rape, murder, attempt to murder, and so on. Right? So how has that happened? Is that what we wanted our democracy to evolve into? That more and more criminals find it easier to get in here. So that's the real issue, sir. And so how do we change this? I also suggest that along with going out there and getting rid of election expenditure limits, we should also make it possible to introduce cleaner funding into the larger political process. And how do you do this? I would suggest that we set up a national election fund. We are the third largest economy in the world in purchasing power parity terms. We are not a poor nation. It does not cost us very much to go out there and invest in cleansing of the system, because that cleansing will make all of us feel better, will make the people of India know that they've elected people through a clean process that will ensure that they earn that respect and legitimacy that will give us more respect and more impact in everything that we say and do. So the National Election Fund has two components in my proposal, sir, and this is a continuation of the argument that I'm making here. The first half of this amount should be put aside and given to political parties based on their previous historical election performance. So that would benefit the ruling party, which has swept so spectacularly, and it would ensure that this money is actually allocated to the district or constituency level office of that party, and that amount is used for legitimate election expenditures, political activity between one election and another. When you do this, you ensure that the social worker, the women activist, the person without deep pockets, the idealist can also go out there and have the resources to conduct events, conduct rallies, get their voice heard, and to even contest elections based on that pot of resource that has been given from this National Election Fund. And if you say, we are already spending so much, why should the government spend more? Why should the public and the taxpayers support this? There is a very simple argument. Cleaner polity is like national defense. It's a public good. It's good for everybody. But we don't have a tradition in this country of voluntarily contributing for these larger causes. And so just like a public good like national defense is paid for through taxes, because we know in our wisdom that the people want a strong national defense, people don't voluntarily pay taxes or make contributions, and therefore you take it from the national exchequer. So the same story here, sir. We need a cleaner polity. It's worth taking some portion. And so I won't even call it state funding, I would call it public funding, because it means it's the people's money that is going there to clean up the system. So the second half should be not for historical purposes, but for the encouragement of newer parties and even candidates. So this part should be kept as a matching fund to match the resources raised by candidates, by parties, through small contributions with, if you want, the Aadhaar number or the PAN number or something attached, so you know clearly who contributed how much. Now when you do this, this is reminiscent of having people have a stake in you, in your ideals, in your campaign, in your party. It reminds me of Mahatma Gandhi's Charana membership of the Congress party, which created a whole national movement, and people felt that with this contribution, they were part of the whole process as well. So this is something that we can work out, and this matching fund will be available to candidates, parties, etc., but it should be as a matching for small contributions from large numbers of people, and that also can be worked out. The Election Commission, the government, the bureaucracy all have the wisdom and the capacity to work out the modalities of how to take this forward. So once you've done all this, which builds on that fundamental premise of getting rid of hypocritical laws, getting rid of that election expenditure limit, then we would have started the process of cleaning the system. We would have started the process of bringing in transparency, sunlight as a disinfectant to the problems and the diseases that bedevil our polity today. And therefore, I urge the Law Minister to go ahead and ensure that this is actually accepted and that this change is brought about, this Representation of the People's Act is amended, and that we will at the end of this process, we will be proud to say that we are the largest flourishing democracy in the world, not the largest hypocrisy in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you.